difficult to understand because of the language and because of this. But is here my friend that will help me.
Okay.
So it's great to see that we're live.
We are live now.
Yeah, Mr. Rajendra, you can start.
Yes. On the day of 21 July at 5 o'clock in India time and 12:30 in Portugal time, I welcome everybody for this e-talk series of India, Portugal, far away, so close. We are going to have a historical discussion between two legendary architects of the world, Mr. BV Doshi and Mr. Alvaro Siza. So I would request His Excellency Portugal Ambassador to give a welcome speech. Please, sir.
Thank you, Rajendra. I'm extremely happy with this the organization of these talks, well, all the credits, I must say, go to my dear friend Rajendra Kumar. We had this brilliant idea, and so I have to thank you first of all to you, Rajendra. I'm also very happy to know that we have a huge audience today. That makes me very happy. And of course, I would also like to thank the moderators of today. As you know, we have two sessions, the one of today with these two great architects, architect Doshi and architect Alvaro Siza, and tomorrow, second one with architect Bijoy Jain and architect Manuel Aires Mateu. So today, I would like to thank a lot of our moderators, architect Kathpalia, architect Nuno Grande, who I met recently in Lisbon, and will be also with us tomorrow. But our thanks go mostly, of course, to our guests of honor of today, architect Doshi and architect Siza. We are really privileged and very lucky to have you with us. It's not every day that we have two Pritzker laureates talking to each other just for us. So thank you so much for both of you. It's a great honor and a pleasure for the Embassy of Portugal to have you with us and to all this big public. Well, as you may suppose, I'm not an architecture expert, not like my dear friend, the ambassador of Brazil, and the Correia do Lago, who I think is also listening to us. No, I am not. Anyway, as far as I understand, Indian contemporary architecture is not very well known in Portugal. Perhaps by some experts, by some architects, but not by the public in general. The same happens if the Portuguese architecture is not well known in India, the Indian architecture is not very well known in Portugal. There's a gap. In Lisbon, we have two main buildings, important buildings. The Ismaili Center, built 20 years ago by my good friend from Delhi, architect Rajeev. We have also a second building, an iconic building, the Champalimaud Foundation, in a wonderful location over the Tagus River. But I think even lots of Indians come to the Champalimaud Foundation to be treated. But I think even some Indians don't know that the building was designed by the great Indian architect Charles Correia. And of course, the same applies to the Portuguese. So there's a gap of knowledge, let's say. And so I hope and I'm sure that this series of e-talks, the one of today and one of tomorrow, will help to fulfill this void, this gap, and to establish bridges of knowledge and culture between our two countries that are, as the title says, far away, so close. So thank you for all of you. I mean, it's great to be here with you. And if I'm allowed, I would like to put one first question, a prior question if Vertica allows me. And I also want to thank our co-host, the Surfaces Porter. And the first question goes mostly to architect Siza. We all know that East and that Goa and that India had a huge impact in Portugal for the last 5 centuries. Our early contact with India made us different from the rest of Europeans. In the art you produce, in the way we cook our food, in the way we live in our houses, it was a huge impact, and that made us really different from other Europeans. And my question is there still a very strong influence of India and in the East in the Portuguese contemporary architecture, or is something more subtle that is just at the back of our minds, embedded in our culture, not so, let's say, not so present? That's something I would like to know. And thank you again for being with us, and I give you the floor. Thank you so much.
So
Thank you so much,
now? Yes.
Excellency. Nuno, I was just requesting Nuno if Mr. Alvaro Siza will answer now or maybe in the later session. Nuno, can you please request Mr. Alvaro Siza to comment on Excellency's question?
So the question was if is there any influence of the Indian culture or Indian architecture still se há uma influência da arquitetura indiana na arquitetura portuguesa hoje?
In a history, a very strong influence. The Manuelino, this style, Portuguese style, late Gothic is a late Gothic with the invasion of the impact of the first Portuguese that went to India and saw the Indian architecture. So the exuberance of the decoration or the work of stone outside and inside was fundamental. So came a new style and something that later influenced, I'm sure, in Portugal, the Barroco, that was so important in Portugal. Also, there was this change reflected in what we call Indo-Portuguese sculpture, religious sculpture mainly. That was the Portuguese took models of religious images to India, and they were then executed by Indian artists. And that is very special. And was a very deep relation. I say this because first time I went to India was in a group of the so-called National Center of Culture. A group of people that went there, some architects, Tavora also went there, and the others. And we arrived by Azar, absolutely, to Goa, the day of the pilgrimage. So when I arrived in front of the cathedral, there was a big line of Indians that were going to visit in the day of Francisco Xavier, commemoration of Francisco Xavier. And the ritual, in the ritual was also the habit to kiss a finger that was inside frasco.
A relative of
So many people. And around there was a fair, and I noticed that there were small images in argilla, in terracotta, to sell, painted. And the image of the Virgin was exactly the same that still today we have in fairs in Portugal. The Virgin on a sphere with a moon. So it was not influence and relation between elites, but it became popular. So for us was a big experience. We visited Goa, the Mount Dew, and then we went to your Ahmedabad by bus, and then to Delhi. And in this parkour, we could visit small villages, and then find their wonderful toys in bronze, elephant and the other animals. I was lucky to get one. It's one elephant in bronze made for children, but old one. And Tabula, on coming back to Portugal, regretted constantly because in Delhi he found in an antique shop Indo-Portuguese Christ, and he hesitated, and he did not enter the shop. And coming back, he was always regretting why I did not buy that image. But he had a very good collection. He and the brother, it was an engineer, fantastic collection of Indo-Portuguese sculpture and also furniture. Now, today, influence today. I believe that the influence today is in our mind.
Yes.
By the persistence of history. The direct influence or change. I think that today the influences come from everywhere. For a Portuguese, for an Indian, and Doshi has a fantastic experience in that, as he could work with Corbusier and Louis Kahn. So he got the best of what was going on, because those two also were receiving influences from everywhere. Amazing influences. Ronchin is in a way the image of a North African house. And the towers are the ventilation elements for these houses. So everybody today, also because more easy communication than in history, when we arrived to India, there was much communication. So the influence is not specific from that or from that, comes from everywhere in a way that it becomes ourselves and is in subconscious. An architect today does not make copies. Perhaps because it is impossible. It has so much influence that it is an impossible operation to say, for this, what is good is Doshi. For this, what is good is Darling. Also, everything is here, but when we need, in a process of project, if without having conscience of it, the influence comes. So in that way, the one of India, relation between India and Portugal, has more the strong fact of in history was a meeting that was a big surprise in the beginning.
Thank you.
With your permission, Excellency, can I just introduce the guest star, Mr. Alvaro Siza. I would just for Mr. Alvaro Siza doesn't need any introduction, but just for a formality, I'm just reading out few of the statement for our audiences. To inform everybody here, we have audiences from 34 countries. We crossed almost 3,000 registration till today morning. We have people live from all part of world, from Japan, Korea, Uruguay, Finland, all part of Europe. Total 34 countries audiences are seeing us live. So just as an introduction of Mr. Siza, I would like to just read out some of his. Siza was born in a small town near Porto. He graduated in architecture in 1955. The formal School of Fine Art was FUAP. Most highly regarded architect of centuries, architect Alvaro Siza is known for his sculptural work and have been described as, when he was awarded the Pritzker Prize in 1992, Siza was credited as being a successor of early modernists. The jury citation describes his shapes molded by light have a deceptive simplicity about their coat, including Pritzker Prize, Architecture Fraternity, Royal Gold Medal 2009, UIA Gold Medal 2011, Golden Line for Lifetime Achievement in 2012. A well-known quote by Siza assert that, and I quote, "Architects don't do anything; they just transform reality." Unquote. This might explain the logic behind Siza's state built on the established model of modernism, who held sway the state of architecture career. And while the reputation of modernism has risen, the fallen since year, Siza has remained affected by experimental and movement of the period. Instead of performing subtly gradual his style over the decade. His latest project in New York, Indian client, stories residential tower in Manhattan, is going to be iconic addition of skyline of New York. Academically also very active. He has taught in Faculty of Architecture and Planning in Porto. In addition, he has also been a professor in Graduate School of Design, Harvard University of Bogota. So I welcome you, Siza sir. Before I proceed for the next speaker introduction, friend, I would also like to invite Nuno, who is a moderator for this session with Mr. Alvaro Siza. Nuno is a great architect, and moreover, he's a great friend. We have been friends from many years. He is a professor in University in Portugal. He has also curated exhibition on Alvaro Biennale 2016, and he is also doing a traveling exhibition in Porto, which is also going to travel other part of the world. So before I proceed for introduction of Mr. BV Doshi, to acknowledge that in our audience, Ambassador Brazil in Korea de Lago also joined us. He's a senior diplomat and renowned architect's critique. He's also jury member of Pritzker Prize. He was also a jury member in the year when our legendary architect, Mr. BV Doshi, who is our speaker of today, got Pritzker in 2000. We acknowledge the presence of Ambassador Andre Arana for your presence today. Thank you, our friend Vertica, to introduce our second speaker, Mr. BV.
Thank you, Mr. Rajendra. There was some disturbance in the voice, Mr. Rajendra, so I request you to check your audio input and output on your system. So before I proceed to introduce the legendary architect BV Doshi. I would like to know, is the voice clear? Can the audience please type a yes, yes, yes from the YouTube and the Facebook pages that you are seeing? Can you type yes if my voice is clear? I just want to ascertain that the audio is fine. Okay, okay. Thank you. Thank you. I can see a lot of yes, yes, yes coming up. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So it is difficult to introduce someone who is bigger than the introduction, right? So I'm trying to, attempting to do so. So ladies and gentlemen, I welcome all of you again on behalf of the Embassy of Portugal and Surfaces Reporter magazine and the curator of this event, Rajendra Kumar. It is a great, great honor for Surfaces Reporter and me to be part of this amazing event. I'm so thankful to His Excellency, Mr. Carlos, the Ambassador of Portugal, and the amazing moderators of today's session, Mr. Rajeev Kathpalia and Nuno Grande. So introducing Mr. Architect BV Doshi is difficult for me because he's beyond this introduction, yet I'm trying to do it. He's the India's pride, architect Balkrishna Vittaldas Doshi, popularly known as BV Doshi. He's the first Indian architect to be awarded the prestigious Pritzker Prize. He's also the recipient of Padma Bhushan, one of the highest civilian awards in the Republic of India. With his 7 decades of work and more than 100 projects, he has worked with the world's best architects like Le Corbusier and Louis Kahn. Dr. Doshi's structures show immense consideration of India's traditions, lifestyle, and environment. Today, we look forward towards a conversation that encompasses between his starting from a very modest furniture workshop, which was owned by his grandfather, to being the recipient of Pritzker Prize in 2018 and Padma Bhushan in 2020. Friends, our favorite Dr. Doshi is going to turn 93 next month on 26th of August, coming up very soon. I want to share a quote by him, which I have picked from his autobiography, Paths Uncharted. I really felt very inspired reading that incident that he has shared between himself and Corbusier. So one day what happened, he shared that Corbusier drew a star. Corbusier drew a star and he showed to Dr. Doshi and said, "This is your dream. This is your dream." So as he was looking at the star drawn by Corbusier, so then after that Corbusier drew a cloud below the star and said, "The dreams often get clouded." So that incident, touched my heart when I read Paths Uncharted. So I thought I should share this such a positive quote I picked up from the Paths Uncharted. That is the kind of the wisdom that Dr. BV Doshi brings. So here is the man of wisdom to whom the wisdom has descended from the great people he has worked with and the great work he has been doing since the last 7 decades. So friends, without wasting much time, I would like to present to you Mr. an architect and Dr. Balkrishna Vittaldas Doshi, most popular and loved and known as BV Doshi. And not to forget the person sitting behind him, Mr. Rajeev, we would like to see your face a little bit. Rajeev ji, apna chehra dikhaye. So he doesn't need an introduction either. Mr. Rajeev Kathpalia is a partner at Vastu Shilpa Architects, the multidisciplinary practice founded by none other than Dr. Doshi. His work integrates environmentally responsible strategies to create inclusive habitats for people. He has won several awards and we all know him and we all love him. So welcoming both of you and all the people who have joined us from so many countries, more than 30 countries, and we're still receiving a lot of more registrations. So I welcome all of you and I request the amazing moderators of this session, Mr. Rajeev and Nuno Grande, to kindly begin the session.
I will put the first question. Nuno, as you had suggested, I will go first with a question to Professor Siza. Professor Siza, it's such a pleasure to be part of this conversation. Though you may not recall, but we have met in Porto in 2004 when you took Mr. Doshi and I and a friend of ours for dinner. But much before that, I was introduced to your wonderful work through a student of mine, Saurabh Malpani. I don't know if you recall him, whose undergraduate thesis was on your architecture. I was his guide. I believe because of his thesis, you asked him to work with you subsequently. More recently, another person who worked with us at Sangat and then came back to work with you was Anand Sunecha. So as you can see, we have many links that connect us, and as His Excellency, the Ambassador just mentioned, these links go back 500 years. I will begin by asking you about your beginnings as an architect. I find that you have many things in common with Professor Doshi. Both your careers in the early stages are connected to designing social housing, teaching, and as a matter of fact, designing a school of architecture where you taught. Did this involvement for designing for the underprivileged and teaching architecture in the buildings designed by you influence your way of thinking about architecture? Let me elaborate a little bit before I open it to you. You know, designing for the underprivileged is premised around growth and change over time. It is incremental and accretive. Architecture is a process and the outcome is forever changing. You often mention in your interviews that your work is never finished. So I was trying to connect your statements with the idea of working for the underprivileged and for teaching.
So the influence of the social housing, a influência da habitação social na sua carreira, como é que ela mudou a sua forma de ver a arquitetura e a relação entre arquiteto e sociedade?
Habitação social, o facto de fazer habitação social. For me, was an important change because until then I had made only some small houses or small equipment in periphery. I was not allowed to work in the town, in the center of town. And those works in periphery were small houses without any interest. The context was very bad. And with the program of social housing organized after the revolution of 75, with a new government, with a big transformation politics in Portugal. There were programs of social housing made by groups of one architect and some students working in the popular housing areas in towns of Porto, Lisbon, Algarve, and so on. So I had the first experience of working just in the center of town and in a context very complex because in the transition from the old regime to a new situation, there was a moment complex, very complex, almost a void of power sustained the situation by the militaries. But until the normalization, the climate was incredible. And for the first time, people that lived around the center, today in the center, that lived in very bad conditions, could have assistance and also could speak of what they wished, what they needed, and so on. Then it was an experience, in a way, working in an urban context. In other way, speaking with people, with participation of people. It was something in that time very in development in all Europe, in South Europe, in Italy, in France, in Spain, in Portugal. So it was a big experience in two senses. Talking with people, having a contact direct with people, making their houses, as we have when we worked to a rich family, then the social housing was made through statistics. So there was a distance and not an understanding total direct. The change was that direct contact. And because of that experience in Porto, that was known, mine and the other architect. Then I was called to Berlin and to this in the 80s, to Holland, and I had this type of experience working with people in different countries in Europe. And I remember to see once I was in Aga Khan Foundation jury, and Doshi had presented wonderful work that I liked very, very much. It was a community for poor people. I think that made with participation also of people, a big community. And I fighted and fighted to give the award to Doshi, but I was not happy with this. Majority went in another direction. One of the things I noticed in this Aga Khan award, how it passes, is that there are in many of the competitions in years a tendency to put up the projects that have mentions of style of the Orient. And there are some buildings of Foundation Aga Khan, I remember very example, in London, that try to be Indian style or next to it. And that is, the result is bad, of course. And the work Doshi I wanted to defend was authentic work, not wanting to be Indian or to be, I don't know what, it was fantastic, but I could. And I am not very happy with in this way, my relation with Doshi work, because during years consulted and all the architects that received before the Pritzker Prize, during years, they consult us to give suggestions, not in every way. There is a jury, but they ask those that had the prize suggestion. And during years, my suggestion was Doshi. Never. And this last time, I desisted. I said, there is some problem that it's not useful to give the name of Doshi for this. So I didn't vote this year. And this year, Doshi won Pritzker Prize. So I thought I made well not to vote on him now, because it was one of conditions that he.
Okay, and if I can return the question to Professor Doshi, I found very many similarities between the neighborhoods that you did in Ahmedabad and in Indore. At the same time, when Siza was doing in Porto his social housing, so you didn't know each other, but you were doing somehow, or you had the same approach to social housing, which is quite interesting, working for the impoverished people. And of course, Alvaro Siza was talking about participation, social participation, and evolutive housing. So how can an architect make a design that permits the inhabitant to go on with it and to increase the space of the house, like he did, for example, in Margueira, in Évora. So how do you perceive this idea of the social participation and the social engagement of the architect with the inhabitant, considering your work in Dore, for example?
There is a usual problem of housing for the poor because they don't own the land. But there was a World Bank proposal that if we can provide, the government can provide funds for services and a small plot of 30 square yards, they can perhaps find some other money from somewhere else. And the squatter who came from outside would begin with that infrastructure and gradually build the houses. So when I had the opportunity to do a project in Indore, I selected the site which was offered to me as a such, for such a project. So I accepted and I decided that the thing that one should do is encourage people by providing them identity. If you have some ownership of some plot, which is not only owned by you, but which has only one infrastructure, a toilet and a water tap and electricity, and if the people who work there or live there have confidence that they own this place, I believe that those who have that kind of sense of ownership become optimistic, and over time they try to add to that place because now they have an ownership. I had observed this in small houses and in villages, and I said, if you can give that identity to them, then they will find their source. So when I got the job, I made a model of 40 houses of different scales in this huge housing. And the one was only one toilet and a room and a kitchen tap and electricity. Other one had one room. The third one had another room and a staircase. The idea being that if one could make that demonstration of couple of houses, of how the houses can gradually grow, then it is possible that they can get an idea and they would invent themselves. My idea over time was that architecture is not static. In India, architecture constantly changes because the family structure changes, economy changes, and ideas change. So over time, the idea of an original house gets changed and modified. And so I think that it is almost like an Indian family, where it is all living and growing and adjusting and modifying. So when I did these houses of 60 model houses, they found out that there was a possibility to do something of what I had shown, but something that they can add on. And today, there are some 40,000 people living there, and everybody has added to the house. The whole idea being that architect is not the designer. The designer is the user who lives the life what they want. And this is something which I think one has to change from the government policy that you give a house and then they can change slightly. So the result has been that today the housing that is done in Indore has become a model because not only that they are added to the house, but they have become prosperous, but they are cooperative. Their community spirit has increased. If you really want to get people to develop community, education, culture, idea of finding their own resources to create what they want, I think one needs to have participation. And what I tried to do in Indore was a participatory process by which you change the whole notion of architecture, that architecture is what an architect designs. But architecture is where people celebrate life. And I think this is something which I tried to do. And I think that has been very successful. Incidentally, I would like to thank Professor Siza for recommending me at the Aga Khan Award. But finally, I did get the Aga Khan Award for this housing when other architects were there.
So, Alvaro, maybe I can ask you also, what do you think about social participation? Because you were seen for a long time as the architect of participation, but that was something that you were not very comfortable with, the idea that everything comes only with the contact with the inhabitants, that there is a role for the architect also in the process.
Yeah, there is a challenge, there is, and sometimes even a confrontation. But speaking, we can understand if we respect each other, the people there and the projectists. So what happened in Malagueira and before in Porto, in São Vitor, is that there was a big urgency and exigence to quickly begin the construction. So we proposed some type of house or types of houses, and we presented and discussed with them. And from this talk with the groups of sometimes 300 people, came critics in the beginning, hard critics, and even people looking the architects said, you are from bourgeoisie, so we want to live in high buildings as bourgeoisie lives. And we had to explain why we proposed a different thing. And in first talks, we thought that the main discussion would be the organization of the house. So how the kitchen is related with the living and dining room and things like that. But quickly, it was a very intense process. The talk together with the movements in the situation in Portugal, political movement, the main discussion came to the town. So people understood that equipments they could not have in each of the small barriers. They had equipments, and that they had to work together, small groups of social housing, which here we call ilhas, islands. They began understanding that they should work together, and the equipments could not be for this, but for this and this and this. So they were discussing the town, began discussing the town. And in that movement, in that way, the discussion was not only related with architectonic proposal, which could provoke reaction different. It was towards the organization of the town. And that was the main structure element to discuss the houses and to develop the project. So in part of architects, there were two positions. We have an organization to work together, but there were different positions. Some thought that we should not make the projects without a clear design, mental design made by the inhabitants. Another group understood that we have to contribute immediately with our education and put it in discussion with the ideas of the different small communities there. And that was the way I preferred. Others as the evolution, political evolution was very quick. This program was through 1.5 years. So those that had worked very fast made something that later was recognized with a contribute for the problem of social housing in Portugal. Others did not make because they considered that respect for people included not to present a drawing, to wait for people to organize it and to determine how. And then this program during in last few times, that was very enriching.
Can you tell us that story that you had with William discussing the bathroom? I think it's a very nice story. The one you were discussing with the cigarette in your hand.
No, that is a joke.
Oh, come on, tell us.
The joke is that I was discussing with the community in a room. There were maybe 300 people. And they didn't accept the idea that I was presenting of bathroom. We had very low budget, so we made small bathroom. And there was this equipment, polyvalent, we call polyvalent. And I was explaining, and one lady, most of the people that would come to discuss in the evening normally were women, because the men were working. So the old woman told me, I don't like that. And I said, oh, we have to do this because there is not money for more. No, I don't like it. And in this discussion, I took a cigarette and was talking with people. The ambience was rather hard. And I put a match. And I stayed like this, working. No, this is the right solution. And so, and suddenly I saw 300 people coming up me. And I thought I was discussing, but I did not I was kind in discussion. They are going to kill me, 300 people coming. And the lady with his mantle like this, and said, oh, I am dead. And the lady put this mantle on my head. What had happened? With the distraction of the talk, my match put fire in my head. And we all, in that time, revolutionary, we used big hair. And so, in fire, that lady saved me. And the other thing is that
It caught fire for the match.
Yeah. And the good thing is that the bathroom with this event was approved.
Okay. I don't know, Rajeev, do you have any question?
You know, the thing which I was wondering, when we teach architecture in the schools, education talks about an architect and the kind of design and the kind of function and kind of services that we should provide to a client. But actually, I did some housing for other people for the Life Insurance Corporation, in which they had 3 different policy holders. One was an economic section with only 1 room and a bedroom and a bathroom. Other one had 700 square feet. The third one had 1,000 square feet. And then they said that is the housing we have to provide. One of the things that I had observed was that everybody over time changes their economic condition. They change their social status and they change their lifestyle and they change modifications into the place where they live. So I had designed that housing in such a way that you do get all the people live together on different floors. That is, one floor below has 2 bedrooms plus other services. Other floor had one bedroom, and the top floor had only one less no bedroom but living room. Idea being that each one would get some open space next to the house for a terrace, because the area of the third floor, the top floor, was smaller than the second, than the ground. Over time, everybody has added to those houses. They negotiated with their local people around, the neighbors, and today it is one of the best community housing that happened, because there was a possibility of change, addition, and as a result, their economic status has changed, their life has changed, their children have grown, it has become a community. So the idea is, could we really not learn or start talking about sociology, lifestyle, changes in the profession of architecture, and not talk only of a typology as housing and living, etc. So whenever we talk about housing or anything, we talk about people, we don't think, that the building will change, the building will modify, people will modify, their status would modify. And I think these are the kind of issues which need to be discussed and debated.
Yes, I agree absolutely with you. And here in the school in Porto, I remember that in the period before the revolution in 76, in the universities, there was much conflicts in the universities, also in the School of Architecture. And the program, the curriculum, the course was discussed and contested, and the new ideas about the curriculum of the course. One thing was the work under the influence also of the entrance of sociology in the school, sociology studies. And one change was many inquests and study of the community existence, communities, social housing, and interviews, study design of the houses, how they were with furniture and so, and talking with people, inquests about conditions of life. And then there was an attention which didn't before exist to real town, real life, and the contact with this. And that was very influential for the programs after the revolution. And school was no more the same after that. It was not the design, the styles, the history. Also, the history became very important then, because you know that in Bauhaus school there was no discipline, and also in general in Europe schools the history was a secondary thing. And then now in this context became very important. One of the important disciplines was exactly history.
Yeah.
So I have a question that I thought that maybe I should bring up. You've always limited the size of your studio or your atelier, and so that you can be directly involved in all the projects, as I understand. Now, you straddle an era where the architect was the prime author of the project, but in today's world of specialists and experts, do you believe that the nature of engagement of the architect has changed? And if so, what are your thoughts on it?
Well, for me is a very disagreeable thing. One of things that more trouble me today is this tendency that everything is specialization. And between the different kinds of activities, there is a relation, but organized, not, and the direct relation, interest in these different activities becomes almost forbidden. And one thing is that the tendency, and that is noticed in competitions, in Portugal at least. For example, if the building is one house, the candidates have to prove they made already one at least house or many. If it is a hospital, they have to say, present that he made hospital. I was put out of a candidature for a competition because in curriculum I did not have a hospital. I had made no hospital. And I was very angry with this. Then I wrote a letter saying, also Alvarado had made no hospital before he made the sanatory and made that masterpiece that still works. On the opposite, I think that people that are obsessive or the tendency for organization through borders, specializations, are less prepared for any type of building because they don't make the relation that all exists between programs, between how look the buildings in a town. You have this and that and that, they are all mixed in town. So this tendency is for me, one of dramatic tendencies today noticed. The maximum is when came here in Portugal, a law obligation. Each team must have to make a public building in the team, one specialist in coordination, engineer, and of course a specialist is the worst possible ideas for a coordinator, because if he's specialized, he has obsessions. But this is tendency, I see.
You sometimes say that the architect is the specialist of the non-specialization.
Oh yeah, exactly. Architect, if it has a specialization, is not to be a specialist, because working with all the people that work in a project, engineers, historians, sociologists, everything, to speak with all these people and to make a whole of these very good contributions, he cannot be a specialist. He can be someone with the possibility of dialogue and an understanding of the items for each of the people in the team, but very open, so that the concentration can happen. The other aspect I see in specialization, I like very much to sculpture, and I still make some sculptures, some drawings mainly, and so. But I feel that if I want to expose sculpture, there is because I am architect, I am not sculpture. So I know we cannot be as in Renaissance, dominate all the fields. Architect was also sculpture and was also engineer and was also this and this and this. That's impossible because the complexity and the amount of knowledge and information is impossible to dominate this. But it's possible to be open to different contributions, to work with them.
Alvaro, I have a very different question for you.
Yeah.
It's not a question, but it is a clarification for the admiration that I have for you. I have seen your book. I have seen many of the projects there and the drawings and the plans. I have also seen your sketches that you had sent me very graciously. And I was wondering the kind of quality of the buildings that are there that you have built. How come they have almost become ephemeral? They don't have weight. They don't feel like, that they are dead buildings, but they look like flowers. They look like something which is intangible, light, open. And I remember when I came with the Pritzker jury long before, you were smoking. And I believe you still smoke. And when I look at those drawings and the human figures and the people that you draw, or the kind of hand drawing you draw yourself sitting on the table with the drawing on a paper, so you are looking at you detached. So are you really always doing this life, as if that you are disconnected, and it is something magical, fluid, something which is ephemeral? Am I right in my observation? Are you disconnected with what you are doing?
Faz parte da própria design.
Yes, many times I do this. I don't know why I did it. Probably because I design in a table. Sometimes in the streets or also, but usually in a table. And in first plan is my hand, and it is almost impossible to avoid to put it. Also because probably, but that is a supposition, this idea of not liking isolation of things. When I make a project here, I am not distant of, there is another here and another here, and when I make this building, there is an influence by, sometimes by contrast, an influence of this context. And in the context of my drawings is my hand, so I didn't want to put it out. It's a supposition, but in fact, I don't know how I begin doing this and when. One time, Tavora proposed me an explanation. He said, you are thinking of o italiano, o punha sempre uma mãozinha, o grande italiano. Não, arquiteto, agora esqueci o nome. Sabe, Vicenza, Palladio. Yes, Tavora made this. Palladio, in his plans, in many times I have seen drawings and sketches, he puts a small hand pointing what he wants to notice. So you have the drawing of a plan, and you see some small fingers there. And Tavora told me, you are making a copy of Palladium. And so I did not know those drawings, but now is a good company. So I'm glad Palladium did it too.
But when you do the drawing and when you are doing your own hand drawing, hand is drawn outside your body, there is a detachment there. There is a spiritual contact and not the functional material contact. And at that point, you perhaps for a minute don't exist. And something happens to the drawing, to the line, to the space, and even to your buildings, because your buildings appear to be extremely light and flowing. I have seen some of your buildings, but when I look at the plans, I find that somewhere there is a connection with the ground and the cosmos. So I was thinking, I may say something, that while you are smoking, you are looking at the smoke, the cloud of the smoke, and new ideas come and you get detached. And I think that is something which I admire about you.
No, that is you are a philosopher and a poet. So when you look to my drawings, you transform. In a way, you make a poem, your poem, about what we see in the drawing, as we make it when you see the landscape and when you see a sculpture also. There are some drawings of sculptures and so sketches and so. Then I noticed that, and I got with that more conviction, that you too are one of those. There are many, I would say, that need to make drawing to think fully and to get from even the hand, the movement of the hand and the lines that appear in paper, to get a structure idea, to get ideas for a project, for a complex thing, in complement of what we think about it and about your education and all of that. Is
But what I find is that you think those buildings are alive. You are dealing with life in your creation. They are not objects.
Yeah.
That's what I found the things.
Yeah,
I love that.
It's very beautiful. I don't remember, I must say, to think of that. But I was not thinking, I was designing. I was concentrating the relation between my mind and the hand. And so well described Alvarado when he speaks about drawing, the influence of drawing in our minds.
So can I take that, since you mentioned Alvarado? I was curious that who were the people or the heroes that you had when you started architecture, got into the profession? Who were the ones that you admired and saw their work or met them and influenced you?
I entered in 49, the school. There was a fight already by modernity with the opposition of the regime. Regime wanted a national architecture, something that never existed in Portugal. There are different architectures by regions and influence between North and South and so on. But fight for modernity, there was one architect, Le Corbusier. Modernity in their Corbusier, and few more well known. But speaking of fight for modernity was Le Corbusier. When I entered, then by Azar, I found a magazine of Instituto Jolie, Don Juan that then arrived to Portugal. And as the director, the professor of project, told me first time he looked for my drawing, a project in school, told me, I will not make a critic, because looking at this, I know you have no idea of what is architecture, modern or old, nothing. Absolute ignorance. So I don't make a critic, and he was right, of course. Even I was not interested in architecture and was in first year, and so they gave me advice, go to a bookshop and buy some magazines of architecture. And so I did, and by Hazard, I got the one overall, one of Gropius, one of Meuter. So, I had already the Corbusier e Alvaro. Then the director, the professor, talked, he was a Bauhausian, talked much of Gropius. But that, we must notice, this is already, but not far from end of war. And at that moment, the force took to a big openness, opening of information, relative open, but some of the regime in Portugal, because there was no more Hitler, Mussolini, and so on. So relative opening, more information, magazines, new coming, intense production after the end of war. So Italians, neorealism, school program of schools in England, France, reconstruction, then Japanese magazine also arrived. So many things that I cannot speak already of the preferred, because they are many. And they are here, they come, it's the part of the education of architects is information. Today, when a student enters the school, he has more information that I had in the middle of the course, because he finds everything that develops interest also. So, from a fixation for Corbusier, I passed to very important Brazilian, arrived, Tabla came with a book of Brazilian architecture, Niemeyer, builds, and all this moment. And then someone brought no news from North Europe, Sweden, Finland, and so, and more information. And then began the historians' information of old buildings, publications about Egypt, India, Japan, and so arrived very good books. Then we lost that fixation of this, and we have material for projecting, much more efficient. And also this, we spoke, this precious thing of subconscious that comes to help the process of our mind, even without dollar or without pain.
So if I may ask Professor Doshi one question. Alvaro Siza was telling that for him, the discovery of Alvarado was somehow a way to escape from the influence of Le Corbusier or the presence of Le Corbusier at the school. And in your case, May I ask you if the discovery of Louis Kahn was also a way for you to escape from Le Corbusier's influence in the early years of your formation, or how would you somehow compare their influence in your life and in your work?
I was teaching in University of Pennsylvania in 1960s, and that is the time I met Louis Kahn. And few years before, Corbusier had done buildings in Ahmedabad, the museum and 3 houses. So Louis Kahn was very much interested in knowing about the buildings of Kahn and started talking about Corbusier. So when he started talking about Corbusier, I was telling him that this is the way it is. And so we became good friends. And we started talking about Corbusier and India, etc. So then I had the chance to do an institute myself. I was offered to do job of a big institute, but I thought best way would be to get Kahn to work in India, in Ahmedabad. So I suggested that to Kahn and said, look, Corbusier has done 4 buildings in India, and you would like to do, it will be nice. Now, 2 things were in my mind. When I did not know much, I was not even educated, and I was not even a student of architecture. I had joined Corbusier as an assistant trainee. Over 4 years that I worked with him, I learned from him about the drawings because we were doing buildings in Ahmedabad, and I belong to Ahmedabad. So while doing this, he would allow me to do the drawing with a little sketch, and then gradually he would sit on my table and then teach me how to really look at the plan and the drawing. But the way it was be drawing, the whole idea was that he was actually talking about life in Ahmedabad, life in India. He was talking about trees, he was talking about garden, he was talking about space, he was talking about sunlight and shadows. Now, so the description, drawing actually, and putting it together in a section and using charcoal and then erasing it very quickly. I think those things to me were very important. And when I got hold of Kahn, he was himself also using the tracing paper and other things. But the point was that really architecture is not just, building, but it is actually a living thing in terms of space, light, fluidity, air. Actually, the Indian architecture's greatest strength is porosity. And Corbusier was very much fascinated by that. For example, in the drawing that we would draw, you were not supposed to draw any doors, the door which is open halfway with a line and an arch. It is supposed to show spaces. So the first thing was, how does one recognize the space? How does one recognize the kind of volume? And then how does one recognize the sun and the shadows? So all those things to me became very important, and they were also important for Louis Kahn at that time. So this is really what was there. It was never a finite drawing. And that is what, I like from Professor Siza's drawings. The drawings are there, but they don't connect, they are open-ended, they lose. So you almost feel life into them. And I think that life is what fascinates me about his work. The sections and the plans which happen, when they come to the ground, actually the earth and the building just sits very lightly as if the bird is sitting on the land. And I think that is something which I was fascinated. And maybe he can explain to me how this happens. There is something to do with the spiritual quality of not touching the paper. You don't want to hurt things. I don't know whether I'm right.
Intentionally, and also work, hours of work. And in that point, the sketch, the training in sketching, that is something very quick, is very good, because while I work in the beginning mainly, I experiment a lot of, even without knowing deeply the program and the different programs, I begin making sketches with the presence, the knowledge of the landscape of buildings, even before visiting. That is fundamental to visit. But I make many experiments, and I make the critic of how it works. This is good in this, is good, it's bad in this. This is very quick. I can change the building, the representation of building can fly this place and until I find something that I get conviction on it. So for me, architecture is more than everything a problem of concentration and work, hours of work.
Yeah, but the relation with the site, relation with the site, because there's always a kind of magical way of how the building stands in the site. How does it come? It's the kind of intuition, or it's hours of work looking at the site.
Looking at first is photos before going to the site. Sometimes I begin before going to the site, but then I go, then I correct things, and it's not intuition, it's obsession, is something very important for architects, the capacity of seeing, not looking, seeing, which I consider the great masters, and I learned also with them, are photographers. Photographers have a capacity of discovering the fundamental of a landscape or of a face. Also, you can go deep in what you are seeing and understand. There are, I call not new, big, very good photographers.
But you also draw the site before the building is there. So you also make your own photography.
Yeah. So that is also a vice. For instance, when I was in India, that visit to Guadalajara and so on, I made 4 sketchbooks as this of drawings in the streets because it was irresistible. So many things happened. I remember in Bombay, life so intense that even if you are not prepared for it previously, we have to get paper and begin fixing things. The cold in the streets and people passing without interrupting us. So I make sketches not only to study a building, but if I go to a site I like, then I cannot resist. And the more irresistible town for that is Rome. Why? Because in Rome you can go to the street, nobody troubles you because they are used since centuries of people making drawings in Rome. In some towns, it's difficult because if it is in South America, people begin stopping, looking, and asking you, why are you doing this? And so Rome is fantastic. And India too. Nobody came to see what I was drawing, and so because they had much to do, to read.
I have a question to Professor Doshi. Maybe both of you. I don't know if you, Rajeev, do you want to make another one?
No, I think we should go for the open questions.
Okay, so it's really the last one. And I come to a phrase that Professor Doshi said or wrote that he says, I am free because I am a child. So in a way, what I see in your work and also in Alvaro Siza's work is this sense of risk or this sense of naivety sometimes, or experiencing new shapes and new forms, new possibilities, like a child would put himself in facing a problem. And I also find this in Alvaro Siza's way of working, not only through drawing, but also the way he tends to risk and to experiment as if he would be a child discovering the world. I once wrote that he is the youngest Portuguese architect. And I dare to say that Professor Doshi is the youngest Indian architect. In a way that you still feel that this childhood that you have in your being is still somehow commanding this will of discovering, of taking risks. Do you accept this reading from me?
You want to answer this? Yes, child.
Yes.
You see, the point I believe is that one is gradually over time gets prejudiced, and he adds layers of knowledge to his mind and to his sensibility. But a child doesn't have any baggage. The child thinks, as if for the first time. The child doesn't have fear. And child is from the heart. So when you want to think fresh, you should be blank. You should have nothing in your mind, as if for the first time. And that is why I think to become a child or to remain a child is thinking fresh, thinking without any prejudice.
Mm-hmm. And what about you? Do you still feel like a child when you're working for the first time in a problem?
I feel more times old person. Old man. But in fact, one thing in our fundamental, in our activity, architects, is joy. We get joy making architecture, as painters feel joy, I'm sure, making paintings and so and so. Because architects, so in a way, this condition of becoming, in a way, a child is also a defense. Because architecture without pleasure and without joy is a horrible activity, would be a horrible activity. So also a need for to get pleasure with that, which today is becoming hard, difficult, very difficult. And one of the great fights architects must have, and maybe the young architects as you, for instance, is fighting for pleasure, exigence of pleasure.
Oh, nice phrase. So maybe we could ask to the audience questions.
So we can maybe request the people who were curating now to open the session for questions from outside.
Yes, we are ready for the questions. We don't don't want this kind of a beautiful session to, come to an end. May I request Architect Doshi and Architect Siza to kindly come on the center of the screen. And right now, I'm going to take some questions from audience. So Architect Manish Chakrabarti wants to know from Architect Siza. He has heard about that there is a film which has been made on Architect Siza. He wants to know what is the name of the movie or film or documentary, and where can he access that?
And which documentary is this? About what?
Is there a film made on Architect Siza?
Oh,
he
yeah.
wants to know.
Not in India. I don't know.
At least 10. I don't know which one he's referring, but it's easy to find in Google. If you Google films about your work, I know at least 10.
No, I can't. We are not able
There
to say.
is one interesting, because it's a walk in Portugal, visiting different works with Kenneth Frampton.
Yeah.
That was produced in United States, but I can find the
Yeah.
and send you.
Yeah.
Okay, please do send the details so that we can share with the audience out here. The next question is for Architect Doshi, and this is being asked by Sarika Suresh from Chennai. She wants to know, in the situation of COVID-19 pandemic, how is social housing going to change? How social housing should change, rather. So, Architect Doshi.
No, we have lockdown, and we are supposed to be, many people are inside their homes. Some people go outside, some people are some other place. So the whole idea is, if you are going to be enclosed into an enclosed space, is it possible to find little corners? You can create some gardens, you can create a pot of garden and a flower, or a bird can come and sit. I think those things we have forgotten as architects. We only do rooms. We do rooms which are completely enclosed with one window or one opening. But the ideal should be that it should become a woven thing with open spaces in between, so that you do get clusters of open spaces from where you can look at the sky. Or you can put a pot of land garden. The Japanese people have bonsais, they put little gardens, small gardens. But those things are very necessary. And I think in Indian climate, it is very good to change, air change, the climate. You can look at sunlight, you can look at other things. We look for high density too, but we never think about air and light and some opportunity to look into the sky or feel the rainwater.
Thank you. The next question is to both of you. The next question is to both of the architects. And this is from a lot of people actually wanting to know. Koi from Philippines, Nimisha from Delhi, Bhumi Panjal from Gujarat, they all want to know how architects can help the humanity to recover from the effects of pandemic in relation to the built environment. So this question is for both of you. How can architects help to, the humanity to recover from the effects of the pandemic in terms of the built environment?
Oh, yes, let's
What I think sometimes, I was 2 months isolated in my house with my daughter, as the recommendations were to be isolated. And it was bad, very bad. It was a constant fight to be interested in something. It was asphyxiating. And many times I thought, how can it be with people that live in very bad situation? Not only the impossibility of isolating, because in a family, if they live in a very small apartment and without very good conditions, as it happens with so many people, must be terrible. And what is happening now is in Europe in general, people are beginning with normal life, and apparently is not yet time for it. Then is coming again contaminations and so. And what even politicians feel is that it's impossible not to open. So they have in one side health, one side the capacity of resistance, psychological resistance, and also economies. I suspect that this is becoming the more important for the activity, interpretation of politicians. But the psychological condition, of course, there are defenses in someone that lives in a good house, and much more someone that has a garden, as some people, but the minority. I have a veranda, very good veranda, opening to a garden. I don't have a garden within first, but I go to veranda and I am there very well. And sometimes it's a good weather now. But people that live in bad conditions must be terrible.
Do you think there's going to be a change after this?
Architect Doshi, would you like to add something to it?
Well, I hear many people, many interventions about a big change. People that say this is has the positive effect of opening the eyes to people. Humanity can not live as we live today, and the disasters, the difficulties are coming quickly with climate, with everything. So this is an opportunity to stop, to think, and will come a big total change in our minds and on our activities. But I suspect it will not happen. And I think that in this idea, some people think that independently of coronavirus, but many others now are speaking also big change into the new man now. But I suspect that for many is a reaction affected by fear of the situation. And when it passes, and I hope it passes quickly, anything
We all
will
hope so.
back to the same, and these things will be forgotten for many. So still we'll go on, and happily, I think this maybe it's not it's not what will happen. Many people will go to the same, or what? Go to the same.
Everything will be the same.
Yeah. And some others, a minority, will go on fighting for a change, but without finding the support that they want in many aspects, in climate, problems of climate, inequalities between people, and so there is many people active militants, but it's difficult to get to a collective movement.
Thank you so much. Architect Doshi, would you like to add to that?
Well, as the pandemic happened, now we are talking about networking. As a result, we find that all the schools, children are really working from home. Similarly, in the offices. So gradually, we are trying to isolate ourselves even more and more because of the connection that is happening. But if you look at electronic, the technological revolution, it is. Let us look at it the reverse way. Today, because of the deliveries, home deliveries, and you get connection to ordering things from outside, so you don't even move out of the house. So there is a greater isolation, much greater isolation. But supposing that you thought about community as something, as an entity, like the old settlement, like the old times, there were communities. The communities were socially, culturally, economically, emotionally interdependent. And they were really working together. So if we can now think about the land use in a different way, and if the community owns the land, create those parcels, and not only that, but they shareholders in this and they do their own activities, we will talk about a different set of communities. And if we do that, 2-3 things would happen. The land use would become better, relationships will change, planning would have a different advantage, and what we would get is something by which each one would have a little bit of land, a little bit of open space, etc. But you share, and you share the value of the land. Today, land belongs to no one almost. And the huge parcels are not owned by anybody. They're public, but they remain empty. So if one was really thinking differently and plan differently, we would have a plan where every house could get a little courtyard, small courtyards, but sharing together. And then there will be large parcels of land where you can even share in a different way. So this is really what I call community of productive culture. We are not talking of culture anymore. And culture is of value. Culture has no market. But that is what life is about.
Thank you so much. At this point, I would like to add Architect Rajendra and Mr. Carlos. And I would like to know if you have any question. By the way, I have a series of questions from people online about education, about your experiences and all that. Do you have any question for Architect BV Doshi and Architect Siza?
Maybe Excellency first, then I will.
Sure.
Excellency, you have any question for our legends?
I will be very quick. First of all, let me say it was a very enriching and delightful conversation, sometimes even touching, because we could understand that both architects are mutual admirers of their works. It was very touching. There was a phrase by Professor Doshi that struck me a lot when he said that architecture is not what the architect designs, is when people celebrate life. And later on, architect Siza said something that goes in the same sense. That architecture without joy is something horrible. So I have a small question to Professor Doshi. When you designed those social neighborhoods, were you already expecting that they will be modified and enlarged by the inhabitants? Was this a surprise to you, or when you designed the buildings, you gave them already space to grow and to be changed later on? Because
the first thing is that yes, they were modified. They were modified internally and externally. So because they were owning them. I think when that ownership comes, convenience is adjusted added on, modified. So that is how they were made, and today they all are there. But the advantage has been that because they were close by and they all simultaneously were adjusting, the communities were getting connected. Because everybody then has a stake in each other's value and meaning.
So they became like organic entities with a life.
Yes, there's a much greater cohesion in the life. So social bond is increasing. Actually, today everybody is busy. Nobody has much time. So bonds are not, they're decreasing. In this case, the bonds are increasing, whether they are different languages, different regions, different beliefs, they are still together.
Amazing.
And that's what is the advantage. Yes.
Thank you so much.
Vertica, with your permission, can I ask one question?
Please go ahead.
I have a question for both. Mr. Siza, it is real pleasure of mine to ask a question. I have a very beautiful drawing by your friend Sauto de Mora when he visited Chandigarh. And when I visited Porto in 2011 with Nuno, I visited one of your project called Tea House, the project of Tea House. So my question to you is that this is the project which you built 50 years before also. And again, you also had an opportunity to renovate the same project. So definitely when you are renovating in today's time, you have to think again with the today's modern generation's need and all those technical innovations. So how was your experience for that? I will phrase the same question to Mr. Doshi also. Sir, same kind of experience, I mean, when you were doing a Nalanda University project, University for Today. So, sir, how was your experience of designing a Nalanda University, the great university of India, and thinking about the need of a present generation, sir?
I tell you.
So, anyone can answer first.
When I renovated first time, was 15 years after the construction. And I was critical about this project. Immediately after the restaurant, I made nearby swimming pool in a more flat area. And I began looking to the tea house as too much accidented. The profile of the building was practically a parallel to the profile of the rocks. And I thought it is too much. Architecture must have also a detachment towards landscape. It's not to follow landscape. Some detachment because it means something new in the landscape. And I entered the building, but this I had already this critique. But when I entered the building, I began looking for that and saying, I don't like that. There are some pieces hanging from the ceiling in wood. And I said, it's too much. I don't like that. I have to take that. And then I realized, if I take that, I also need to take that. Because everything is in relation. And so on and so on. And in a moment, I discovered two things. One, that I should demolish the building. The other one was that even if I don't like, if I feel this thing related intensely to that one, and related that one to the other one, it means there is consistency, quality in this architecture, even if I don't like. It was not exactly not like, but not to agree with this and this. So I will touch nothing and almost recuperated, but I didn't touch nothing at all. This was the experience of, and I thought this, in the end, this was made by another architect, the young Alvaro. So I must respect him also. That was the story.
Doshi sir, your experience about Nalanda University project, sir.
Rajeev, my partner, has done that, so let him talk about it.
I think Nalanda, I think if I understand your question, you were saying that there was this ancient university in the 4th century AD, and the ruins of it remained. And all of us imagine that university from those ruins. We don't know actually what it was, but all of us in our imagination think of it in some ways. And so the challenge was that today's program, today's needs of technology, all of those are very different from obviously those times. So it is only that emotion, how do you connect to that emotion? So what does it look like? That is one part of it. But ruins can be conjured up in many ways that they can fulfill. So you leave buildings sort of incomplete, they're not complete, and they house in things within them, then it's like occupying the ruins. They are not literally ruins, but they are like occupation of piles of bricks. So that's what it is made of. But I think more importantly, I think the issue is that there was a process that they excavated and made ponds out there, lily ponds and lotus ponds, which collected water for the rest of the year because we have monsoon rains once in a year. So those things I think were more important to understand the whole ecological way of balancing out things and using that material to make compressed earth block rather than brick, so you don't burn any carbon as such. So those were taken from those aspects of the ancient times and converted to today's times, and that's how it's being designed.
Thank you, sir. Vertica, are you taking any more questions?
Yes, there are lots of questions, so I would like to take up some of them. This question is again to both of you, and someone wants to know like how the architecture education should change in the time to come. What are your suggestions for the change in in the way education happens for architecture?
Let Alvaro answer.
Educação,
How an architect should be trained? What are the changes today for the training of an architect?
Considering when I began course of architecture, and today what I see is increasing very strong of information and opening to the complexity of architecture today, different contacts that must exist, and the preparation for working in team. So capacity of dialogue and the openness to put together different types of information that comes from the work of the teamwork. So capacity of dialogue is very important. First projects I made almost alone. Today is completely different. And also there is an enormous complexity, some that seems to me exaggerated. That is regulations. Some okay, but some are a kind of invention of specialists that must have their role and their word. There are things very impressive is that to make the education in architecture is, at least here, too isolated. I mean, the preparation for this teamwork that makes the exercise of dialogue and understanding and so is not inside as much as needed, I think, inside the schools of architecture, because they are, by organization, isolated. You have faculty of architecture, faculty of engineer, history, and so and so. And the contact between them is not so clear as it should be, in my opinion. But I see that it's very difficult.
Okay, thank you so much. Yes, Mr. Rajendra, you're saying something?
His mic is off.
Your mic. You have to unmute. Yes.
Can you hear me?
You can.
Okay. I believe, Vertica, we can take a wrap up now, because
Yes.
it's already 2 hours. I mean, our legend has been continuously speaking. I would like, if before I go for final thank you note, if Excellency would like to say thank you to our legend, so that when the legend goes, we can do this formality of thank you note to all. Rajeev sir and Nuno, you can, I mean, the moment when Excellency says our speakers can go, then I will read out the thank you note.
Thank you, Rajendra. Well, architect Siza regretted that nowadays Renaissance men are not allowed to exist anymore. But I think that both of you are still Renaissance men, 21st century Renaissance men, and so we were very, very, very lucky to have you with us. And thank you so much. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. I'll just read out, I mean, as a formality for the thanks to all of our back-end team. It will take only 1 minute. I'm sorry for that.
Architect Rajendra, I would like to take a moment.
Yeah.
There are lots of young architects logged in, and many of them, they want to know the messages for them from Architect Siza and Architect Doshi. So just one last one request from the young architects and designers who are logged in. What is your message to the young architects and designers, who are starting out for architecture now in this period? What is your message for the young architects?
Sir, just a one line if you want to say. Doshi sir, please, just a one line. We will not take your time. I believe any small word of Doshi sir will be a big blessing for them. So just one word.
Absolutely.
Please, sir. Doshi sir, just one. If any.
Discipline, but architecture really is a wholesome thing. It connects everything. It connects all life, all resources, all agencies, all supports, all whatever you want to say. Because architecture, that word is not correct. You should use the word habitat. We are talking about living. So I would say think about habitat, because the moment you think about life and habitat, everything else will follow.
Wonderful.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Siza, any last comment to our young architects?
Yes, a message from a young architect to the youngest architects.
Oh, yeah. Yes. What message? try to defend pleasure in architecture and not submission to constraints and a type of work mechanical. Try for open mind and attention to the fact that architecture is a service. In first place, is a service. We work for the people and for all the people. And a service that can be not painful if we can do it in this dimension of openness and pleasure and joy and childhood.
Thank you so much. So with this, we conclude our first session. I would like to thank Ambassador His Excellency Mr. Carlos Marquez, Embassy of Portugal, New Delhi, for your great support and believing in me, sir. Thank you so much, sir. I also express my thanks to our legend speakers, Mr. Alvaro Siza and Mr. BV Doshi, for accepting to be here for such an inspiring discussion for audience from all over the world. We have people listening from 34 countries. Dr. Sofia and Mr. Harpreet Singh from Culture Center, Portugal Embassy. Our friend Nuno and Rajeev Kathpalia, sir, for such a great support and great moderation. Mrs. Vertica and Mrs. Madhu and her team from Surface Magazine, thank you so much. And my university staff and my all faculty members. And last but not least, our audiences from all over the world. Thank you so much. I welcome you all for tomorrow again at same time for the next session with Vijay, Jan and Manuel from Portugal. Thank you so much. Thank you, sir.
Thank you to all of you. Thanks to all of you for joining.
Okay.